members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at solicitation of Japan, still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. Indeed, 1 hour after Japanese air squadrons had commenced bombing in the American island of Oahu, the Japanese ambassador to the United States and his colleague delivered to our Secretary of State a formal reply to a recent American message. And while this reply stated that it seemed useless to continue the existing diplomatic negotiation.
On December 7, 1941, the Japanese Navy Air Service bombed Pearl Harbor because they were afraid that America was going to interfere with the war. This led to a strained relationship between the Asians and Americans. Americans would treat Asians very harshly, blaming all of them for the terrible deed. President Roosevelt thought that there were Japanese spies throughout the US, so he ordered all Asians to be sent to internment camps, even if they weren't Japanese. Many of those people lived near the Pacific coast, in which they were all forced to evacuate. This was known as Executive Order 9066.
This order violated the Fifth Amendment, stating in LIA website. It shows that no person shall be held to answer for capital or otherwise infamous crime, unless of presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces, or in the military, or in actual service in time of war or public danger, nor shall any person be subject for the same office to be twice put in jeopardy of life or in limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property, without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken from public use without just compensation. This means nobody can be arrested without proof of criminal act, nor can their property be taken away as so placed without fair compensation.
More than 100,000 Asians were arrested by President Roosevelt and detained in internment camps. Despite the fact that some of those individuals were not even Japanese, Roosevelt still went forth with the executive order. The attack on Pearl Harbor was a watershed moment that precipitated Roosevelt's ambitions, marking a turning point that triggered the enactment of the executive order. The assault on Pearl Harbor was a surprise military strike on the United States, in which the Japanese believed the U.S. was interfering with their military goals. According to History.com, President Roosevelt issued the executive order in response to this, and in doing so, he violated the Fifth Amendment, which stipulates that no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury. In other words, no one may be arrested unless criminal activity is proven.
According to History.com and ushistory.org, when Executive Order 9066 was issued, Japanese Americans had to sell most of their properties at a fraction of their true value. When they were sent to internment camps, they faced hard conditions there. They lived in remote areas, often buildings that were not built for human habitation. The camps were often too cold in the winter and too hot in the summer. The food in the camps was army-style grub. In addition, violence occasionally occurred in the camps. If the interns tried to flee, armed sentries would shoot them down. In March 1976, President Gerald Ford repealed Executive Order 9066. In 1988, Congress issued an apology and passed the Civil Liberties Act, awarding $20,000 each to over 80,000 Japanese Americans as reparations for their treatment.
No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
Racial prejudices and discriminations happen all the time. When I was in middle school, I was eating lunch with my friends who were all Asians. Then there came a white boy who looked at us and said, "Asian," with a condescending tone and arrogant look. I was stunned and just stood there. I was so surprised by his racial despise he was showing on his face at a school with so many different races. It wasn't until later, when I thought through this again, that I realized that it is not shameful to have a different racial identity. I should have spoken up for my ethnicity and myself, and told him, "Shame on you for being racist."
I haven't really been to places where Asian people were discriminated against, because I lived in places where there were a lot of Asians around, though I can see Asian hate becoming a big problem elsewhere. For example, when I went to New York for a summer camp, I was just peacefully using the bathroom when a group of African Americans told me to get out, or they would beat me up. I barely even did anything to them, but they started to call me Asian man and started insulting me and banging on the door, threatening to break the door down if I didn't come out. Luckily, I didn't get hurt, but this shows how easily people can be harassed for being Asian.
Growing up, many of my friends and I were often struck by white people's unfavorable comments about traditional delicacies. They would frequently remark on how smelly the meal was or how strange it looked, smelled, or tasted. I realized that I didn't fit in with the other kids who sat and ate their peanut butter jelly sandwiches at that point, so I begged my mother to stop packing me such types of meals. It's safe to say that it was one of my worst blunders, one I will never forget. It wasn't until middle school that I learned my culture wasn't strange and that criticizing ethnic delicacies was cruel. This event taught me a valuable lesson that I'll carry on with me throughout my life. Don't listen to people who want to blame you for your cultural differences just because they haven't been taught about cultural diversity and its beauty.
Injustice and discrimination were just like an erasable mark throughout history. This is not a social problem, but also a moral problem. The injustice is still occurring today from the 17th century when the first group of Asians arrived to America. They faced Asian hate and discrimination. Even now, Asian Americans are still encountering social injustice and prejudice. A lot of international students have faced this problem before. They tend to bully or exaggerate out culture to shame us. The behavior had hurt to many Asians and led some of them trying to hidden away from others. I am a Chinese-born person. I lived in America for 3 years. And whenever I communicate with other people about culture, they will always exaggerate it and trying to shame me by saying some embarrassing Asian culture. For example, like Asian always eat dog, which is not true. Every Asian's parents are strict, and Chinese food does not smell outstanding. All those prejudices are familiar to me and many of my Asian friends. Therefore, we need to stand up and deny Asian hate and injustice. The stereotype in others' eyes had become an erasable mark that appeared on Asians, and even many universities has required Asian grades to be better than others. Those are unfair. We need to stand up and deny those.